All right, so people can see the mirror board. So welcome everyone. Good morning or afternoon or wherever you are. Welcome to our international gig, as we called it. I am very happy to do this with my friends from Belgium and the Netherlands. Today we will be talking about a very important and frequently asked question: when to go from collaborative modeling to coding. We get this question from time to time. And we thought that it might be good to do a talk around it. So in essence, we will be talking about polarity management today. And well, we always like to start with a story outside of the IT world. And at this point, the story that we picked might look or sound like a fairy tale. But yeah, we are just going to go with it for now. You are still following me, right, Kenny?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. So, planned travel versus wherever the wind takes me. As said, this is a very unrealistic example at this point, maybe a sad one, because we all want to travel, we all want to go out probably, but a bit of daydreaming never hurt anyone. So we were discussing this talk and we were discussing examples, and this one came to mind. There are different types of people, right? You have people that plan everything up front, and you have people that just pack the bare minimum, go to the airport and see where they will end up. Personally, I don't really understand this last group, but maybe that's the control freak in me. But the thing is, if you have planned everything up front, then you might miss out on some spontaneous things that you really don't want to miss out on. So maybe it turns out that when you get to your destination, there is an awesome event happening, but you cannot attend because you planned everything from hour to hour, and going to something unplanned will interfere with that planning. On the other hand, if you don't plan anything, you might risk not being able to do certain things because it turns out that you had to make a reservation 6 months up front. So there are benefits and downsides from both of these options. And in an ideal world, there would be a way to balance them so that we can benefit from that we can get the best of both worlds, actually. So this is what we think of as a polarity. And this is what we also want to talk about today. So when we move back to our world, in the world that we are working in, we very often we are asked to consult companies to help them start with domain-driven design and collaborative modeling. And very often this question pops up when people start to experience the downside of just doing one thing, and mainly just doing the coding part. They experience that they are lacking some sort of direction, and they are looking for new ways and guidance. So what they do usually, Kenny, maybe you can stop typing.
Sorry.
They read up on domain-driven design and collaborative modeling, and they understand that they are missing this shared knowledge and shared models between the developers and domain experts. They are missing this shared sense of reality. And then they want to fix that by implementing collaborative modeling, and think that this will be the solution to all of the problems. So I set in the slide buzzword. In this case, it's collaborative modeling, but we want to reuse the slide. So this is why we created a buzzword there. So we want to do collaborative modeling. And then, of course, the question arises, but is that the solution? Is collaborative modeling really the solution? Well, what happens, we as consultants, we go into the organization, we do collaborative modeling sessions, and things seem to go pretty well. We get new insights, there are good conversations going, new models, new solutions. But after a while, we see that the group gets stormed. And one side of the group wants to stop the collaborative modeling part. They're done with that and they want to dive into the code and get the details right. And there's a side of the group that wants to continue with the collaborative modeling part to reduce any form of risk, and they see very much value in this collaborative modeling part. And then they look at us and they say, well, you are the so-called experts here. What do we need to do? When do we go from collaborative modeling to coding? And so far, our best answer was, it depends. You can imagine that I was very happy when I discovered this thing called polarity mapping, and that gave me a whole new set of answers to give, because it depends. I like the answer, but it's not very satisfying. So the polarity mapping thing, that led me to the realization that we are looking at these questions, when do we go from collaborative modeling to coding, in the wrong way. We look at them as problems that need to be solved, that have a clear answer, A or B. And we are not looking at them as a polarity that needs to be managed. So is collaborative modeling the solution? No, it's not, because it's not either or. It's not either collaborative modeling or start coding, it's both and. And that is a characteristic of a polarity that you need to manage. And if you manage these well, then you can gain a whole lot. So today we want to take you on that journey, a short journey of polarity mapping, and let you discover what it can do for you. There will be some interactive part. So if you are not up for that, then you can still drop out, but it's not hard. It will be fun. So please stay with us. And it will help you come up with new answers besides it depends. And that's a really good benefit. So that's why you should care. But there are other reasons why we should care, right, Kenny?
Yep. Yeah, so why should we care? So to give you a quick example of another polarity that we all know, it's that breathing in and that breathing out, right? But we all know how to do that, and it's so evident when to stop breathing and start breathing out. But when we're doing this collaborative modeling sessions and coming out of the domain-driven design community, right, that's one of the key aspects. There's a lot going on in these groups that we're not aware of. And one of these is like this collaborative modeling versus modeling. Another one, a few other polarities we're going to get on later on, but let's focus on that. So what usually happens is that someone in this company experienced the downside of one of these polarities, and we're going to get into these things a little bit later with visualization. But they feel that, and then what they're going to do is they're going to look at the internet, and there's this hype going on. Maybe it's microservices, but in this case was DDD, a bit of EventStorming, collaborative modeling. They say, this solves my problem I'm having right now, right? And they come to us, and they start this getting people on board with this. And these people, with the full intention, it's within polarity map we call that a type, and the type here is crusading, right? So there's this old status quo, and they're saying, well, this is not helpful for me, so we need to do this. That's what we call a crusader. So really nice. If you look at polarities, you always have two types, and the first one is crusading. They're not so happy with the status quo you're in now. So now it's like everyone sitting behind their desk and coding, but we need to go to crusading. So first interaction mode now, and we're having some Gien fun facts. Gien fun facts. I need to say it in Belgian, not in Dutch. So quick question about crusading. Gien.
Time for Gien's fun fact intermezzo.
Woohoo!
So we all know the Crusaders from the Catholic Church, but what were they promised when they went on a crusade? Was that A, salvation from hell, B, a place in heaven, or C, absolution from purgatory?
You can use the chat, or you can type in sticky on the board, whatever you want.
Dum, 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 dum. All right, I will give you the answer. It was, there's still people talking. Give me some time
We
more.
have C, B, A. We got them all.
We got them all. The correct answer is C. They were granted absolution from purgatory. And purgatory was the place you went to burn off your daily sins after you died, basically, which seems like a bad deal because they were going to, kill people, which actually sends you right to hell, and they actually could still end up there. So I don't think they got a good deal on that one. But anyway, this was the fun fact intermezzo.
Yeah, so going back to our modeling session where we usually in, right? We're doing domain-driven design, we're doing some event storming, and at some point, these crusaders are always in this mode of we did not go deep enough, right? Maybe something you hear. So this crusader says, well, I'm not sure if we went deep enough. We need to do some more collaboration. And this starts to happening, right? So the answer is we need to do some more collaboration. But then we get to the second type, and that's the people who live in the status quo. And we call these the tradition bearers. The tradition bearers, they see the negativity of the other pole. What does that mean? They see, well, this takes a lot of time, and well, this collaboration, let's just type and let's just see it compile. Right? So, well, they went with the crusading part and they say, well, great, but this doesn't compile yet. We all have all the stickies on the board, we did some whiteboard modeling, but it didn't compile. We need to start programming to actually see it work. So I hope that this recognizes that these polarity starts happening in groups discussion, right? And what usually happens is you get a sort of two sides, them versus us, and that's the polarity happening. And in this case, it's like some people just want to code and build stuff, and some people say, no, we need to plan more and we need to think about it a bit more. And in this case, again, like we said, it's not either or, it's both and. And that's what we call a polarity. It's just like breathing in and breathing out. And there's multiple of these happening, and we're going to get back to that a bit later. But what are we going to do with this polarity is we need to make the group aware that there is a polarity going on there. And instead of jumping to conclusion and solutions, like we need to stop doing this and we need to get some overview of what's going on. And that's why we need to visualize polarity. Well, collaborative modeling is all about visualization, so from whiteboard to visualizing the polarity is really easy, right, Gien?
Exactly. So why do we visualize? It's because, you know, people are very visual. We see bunnies and dragons in clouds when we're not even trying to do that. But yet when we have meetings or when we're discussing, we often just talk and don't make it visual. So in domain-driven design, we look for these easy tools to actually make it visual, that people have something to hang on to, because it creates a focus on the topic that you want to discuss. And it also creates a shared understanding with everyone that's involved in the discussion. So how do we visualize the polarity? Well, this is the map. I want to zoom in a bit so that you can all see that better. All right, so this is the map. It's very simple. It has a lot of bells and whistles, but if you boil it down, all you need is basically to draw a cross on a whiteboard, and you can start visualizing a polarity. Now, since this is digital, you can make it a bit more aesthetic, which we did, and it will take you through the entire map and tell you what it actually means. So first, we want to visualize the two poles. So we have a left and a right one. The reason why we talk about left and right is because they are equal, right? So we put them on the same level. Oh, apologies. This is what happens if you don't have a clicker. I'm almost there. Thank you for your patience. And every pole has an upside and a downside. So the upper quadrants represent the positive effects you have of both poles, and the downside, the two down quadrants represent the downside that you will experience of the two poles when you go in one of them. So upside and downside is another way to look at the four quadrants. And then next, you may have noticed that we also added a bit of color to the map. So we did not do that only for aesthetical reasons. It's because the diagonal quadrants are also linked. When you experience a downside of one pole, it will often be the opposite of the positive effect you will experience of the other pole. For example, you have the whole individual freedom versus team decisions when you work in team. You know, some people want individual freedom and the other want team decisions. And the truth is that you kind of need both in order to function well. And the downside of focusing too much on the individual is that people start to feel isolated. And if you move to the other side, to the positive side of team, it's that, you know, people get the feeling that they belong somewhere. So the isolation becomes the belonging to something, to a team. So that is why we have the color matching. It's because, you know, they're sort of linked and become opposites of one another. And then the last one is the infinity symbol that is actually on it. And it's because the symbol is there because we want to represent that you need to find a balance when you're trying to manage the polarity. It's not an either or, it's about a constant movement between two poles so that you can actually benefit the positive effects of both, that you stay in those two upper quadrants as much as possible. But in order to do that, you kind of need to sway to one. And the moment you start experiencing experiencing too much negative effect of one pole, you kind of have to make that movement to the positive side of the other pole. And that way you're sort of always in a constant motion. Okay, and then something we added, I'll talk about the actions and the signals a bit later in the talk, but a helpful tip is to sort of give a name to the positive effect of both sides and a name to the negative effects of both sides, because this makes conversation a bit easier if you're talking about these polarities. All right, and then it is time for another fun fact intermezzo. And since I'm still talking, it's mine again. So infinity symbol is also called a lemniscate, which comes from the Latin word lemniscatus. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. But what does it actually mean? Is it A, round corners, B, decorated with hanging ribbons, or C, the devil's curve? All right. Ooh, no. The correct answer is B, decorated with hanging ribbons, because a ribbon can sort of be seen as an infinity symbol. So that what is the word actually means. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of what the polarity map looks like, we get a lot of questions, okay, but how do you fill this in? And the bad news is, any way you like. There's no right or wrong way to fill in a polarity map. But of course, since we really want to move away of that, it depends and you can do whatever you want sort of attitude. We created a couple of examples that you can use to actually fill them in. So first, you have the easiest way, which is you just pick one, you fill it in, and then you move to the diagonal side, to the opposite of it. So in this scenario, we just picked the R plus, and then once you filled R plus in, you just go to L minus. So that's easy. You just basically follow the diagonals. And then one that Kenny and Evelyn mentioned, which I really like, is the minority first. Because in a group, people have preferences, but those preferences are never, 50-50. Like you'll have a couple of people that, crusade and really want to start doing collaborative modeling. And then you have 70% that sort of wants to code or vice versa, but it's never 50-50. So what you could do is start with the minority first. And it's a bit confusing because what this actually means is that you will start with the negative sides of the majority pole. So in this example that you see here, the majority actually wants to do the left pole. So you start filling in the negative sides of this one. And then when you're done, you move to the positive effects that the minority pole will create if you move towards it. And then we have a third one, and I called it the hardest, because from my experience of doing pro-con fixed lists with people, it is very, very difficult to come up with positive things. Like negative things, anyone has like a 50 ready whenever you ask for it. But if you ask about, yes, but what positive will this bring to the environment, they're sort of like really struggling. So if you want to do it the hard way, you start by filling in the upper quadrants. You start with the positive things that both poles will actually bring you. So those are a couple of ways that you can actually fill in a polarity map. And now, because we have spoken quite a lot, I hand it off to Kenny to actually show you how you do this, some live action. And you can put on your microphones and start helping us. Please feel free.
Yeah. Or you can use the chat, right?
Or the chat, yeah. I'll monitor the chat, so that's also fine.
So here's the polarity map. Today we're going to start with, I need to unlock this one. But today, I hear myself double halfway.
Yeah, you're echoing.
I'm echoing. just 1 second. So we're starting with the left side. So I'm going to just place the sticky over it. So the left side today would be coding. So what would be a negative thing about coding, in this case, coding in isolation? What would be a negative thing? So just we get a new requirement in, and we're just gonna straight off code, take it off the backlog without doing any collaborative modeling, and we just start. So you can write it in chat, or well, I'll start off with one. So this would be more waste, right? So because we're straight away coding, we're gonna make a lot of mistakes because we haven't aligned on it. Especially if you use something like branching modeling, you're probably gonna have more waste. So
let's add the more mistakes then as well, right?
Yeah, the more mistakes. Anyone else?
We've not understood the requirements, or the customer hasn't been able to give them to us clearly.
So assumptions? Can I call it assumptions on requirements? Yeah. So not clear. Well, which resolves again into the more waste, more mistakes, right? So we're going to make assumptions. Any more?
Norman, can you elaborate a bit more on the knowledge of business? Do you mean the lack?
Oh. I'm going to get back to the... So is that the... choosing the wrong technology set? Yeah, so I also have the hard to align with people who cannot read and do code, right? So we're doing requirements, these people cannot join in. Part of domain-driven design is get clear understanding between people who cannot read and people who can read code. So choosing the wrong technology stack. Are you typing, by the way? Mine makes too much sound.
Yeah. That's a good one.
So that's the negative. So we started with the negative. So what would be if we go to the upper side? So let's do more what we call collaborative modeling here on this side, right? Collaborative modeling. So what would be a positive side of collaborative modeling? I'll start clear direction, for instance. So clear directions. If we do collaborative modeling, we together create a clear direction. Anyone else?
Oh, it will be easier to see because you have those clear directions. It will be easier to see the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, and cheaper and faster to explore possible solutions.
Yeah.
Understanding domains, yeah, we're going to understand more of the customer. So that's the opposite one, as we already said, right? Of the, and it's, you get a better understanding. You can create a common language together. Might also be one. More inclusive to people who don't understand code. So it's better collaboration. Well, it's in the name, collaborative modeling. You can do it with stakeholders, exactly, the ones who cannot read code. Okay, so let's go to the downside. What would be a negative effect of doing too much collaborative coding? So doing this too long, what would be a negative effect? And I already mentioned one at the start, and that's why, as long as it doesn't compile, so no guarantee any of it will compile because they're just stickies, right? So we're not sure if it's compiled. Yeah, customer does not see progress. Good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So no progress. So no progress means no feedback. So and I always have, like, at some point when I do collaborative modeling, I'm like, I'm sitting on this energy and I just want to see it work, right? No MVP. So this is the extreme part, right? But you can imagine that on a smaller level, that's there. So why? So missing feedback, sitting on energy is one
A good one.
And it can be that a negative one is the requirements are clear, Yeah, why would we do collaborative modeling, right? It's no more horrible than sitting in a session and you've not learned anything new, right? I might as well just code it because, well, we already knew. So what would be the positive effect then from coding that counterbalances? So, well, one that I have is I feel accomplished from learning from action, right? So we're learning from the action and I feel accomplished. Oh, yet another meeting. Nice. I like that one. The downside of collaborative modeling is yet another meeting.
That's a very good addition.
Yeah. So Joshua, you mean feedback loop with stakeholders? That's the positive one from coding, I guess? Yeah.
Positive, yeah.
You can see if it's going to work. Feedback here. Well, now we're deep and detailed as well. Test the feasibility of the solution. I think that one, this was positive from this one.
Sorry, misplaced that one.
Teams feels like they're making progress, so we're having progress. Yeah. So we are stretching it a bit up, right? And if we do this, we did this with a lot of teams, and usually these middle ones also dependent on context, but you see patterns starting to arise that you will always see. So that this is interesting to do, and we talk about why this is helpful to do, because if you go online, you probably can search these standard polarity maps, but just the mapping itself, and it's the same if you look at Wortley mapping or something else, it's the mapping that's the value here, because we start to see understanding, and we're going to talk a bit more about that. But what the really interesting part is what we're going to go next to after Gien's fun fact intermezzo.
Time for another fun fact intermezzo. We will now test your Disney knowledge. Who said if you walk the footsteps of a stranger, you'll learn things you never knew? Pocahontas, Nala, or Timon and Pumbaa?
So this goes into the polarity mapping, right? Because you're doing this mapping, and the mapping itself, you walk into the footsteps of a stranger getting to know each other. You get A, B, A, C.
People have seen the right movie, it seems.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. The correct answer is A, Pocahontas. If I had a singing voice, I would actually start singing the song in which she says that, but I don't, so I will spare you all that.
Yeah, let's.
Thank you for your moral support, Evelyn. Please do not start singing. Okay, so as I already mentioned, we also have actions and observations on the map. And those are the two things you need to sort of know when you have to start shifting to the other side. So basically, observations are just signals that you signal the downside of a pole, right? They're also called signals, which is why that sentence was a bit confusing to pronounce. But basically, you have all these downsides. And if you start observing people, you will start noticing them showing a certain behavior. And that will signal that you're actually or really experiencing a lot of downsides of it. The observations are also context dependent. It means that when you notice one thing with one group, you will not be able to notice it in a different group. A good example of this is meetings in a company. If you have a company policy that says no cell phones during the meeting, then you will not be able to observe the behavior that people are zooming out because they keep checking their phone, because there's no phone in the meeting. So it will not work for every group, and you sort of will have to think, okay, for my group, what observations can we actually make to signal the downside of a poll? You can also make observations measurable, but you don't have to. And we prefer not to, because sometimes people get stuck in the measurement of it, instead of the fact that it's supposed to signal you something and that you have to do something because you're experiencing too much of the downside. So a couple of examples of the signals and observations that you have. When you're coding and you go away for a cup of coffee and you come back and you're like utterly confused about the code that you just wrote, it could be that, you know, it's getting too complicated and you don't fully understand yet what the requirements are, and that it might be time to do some more modeling. If you have to start a lot of, if you start adding a lot of comments in your code, for me, that is a clear signal that I don't understand enough about the requirements from the business experts, because I'm not finding the right names and I have to sort of express all these thought patterns in comments. But there are groups that sort of have a no comment policy in their code. So again, that's an observation you will not be able to make if you have such a policy in place. And I think a clear signal, if you have to start writing really weird hacks to get the code working, you might be, you know, experiencing a lot of the downsides of coding too much. But of course, you also have signals and observations that you can make when, you know, the collaborative modeling has been going on for too long. Like one is like people start zooming out of the modeling session. Since Alberto Brandolini says that you're not allowed to have chairs during a modeling session, people sitting down is not a good one, but people checking their phone, people checking their watch. When we say that you can make it measurable, you can say like if like 3 people are busy with their phones during the modeling session, well, that's a clear signal that something is wrong. But then again, like we said, you can get really stuck on that 3 and you don't want to do that, which is why we don't add a number. It's also a bit, you know, of a feeling when you're giving a modeling session, like, okay, people are clearly tapping out here. Another signal is when they start focusing on the technical aspects, because then they're actually talking about coding. Like they want to code, so they start talking about the coding. And, you know, maybe we should start coding this. Or you just get trapped in unimportant details and you go round and round and you're not making any progress anymore. It's like, okay, we discovered everything there is to discover. We can start coding again. And if we sort of start hitting that negative side of the coding, then we can sort of do another modeling session. But for now, this has been enough. So basically, there's a couple of signals and observations that you can do. So then you have the actions or the heuristics, which is the term more used in domain-driven design, is heuristics. And basically, there are things that you can do to move you to the positive side of the other pole, right? Because you saw all these signals, all these observations, and you kind of want to go back to the other pole. So you need to take action in order to do that. And there's a relationship between action and observation. There's a one-to-one relationship, which means for one signal, we will have one action that you can take. But there's also a many-to-one relationship. It means like a group of observations will have one action that you need to take in order to move to the other side. So a couple of examples of actions and heuristics in this context is you just start coding the current incomplete model, and it sees where it leads you. Another thing you can do is sort of like you pick the path that will cover 80% of the cases, and you start coding that to see if the basis is okay. And you implement the technical aspects that you were just discussing. Some actions you can take to go to modeling is, you wrote hacky code. So you take that hacky code and you start from there. So you start modeling the hacks that you made. You model the comments that you just made, which is a one-on-one relationship. Because we had the observation that you were starting to add a lot of comments. Or you can just say like, whatever we're going to model the thing that is most unclear to us now. And that might not be the place where you added a lot of comments or something like that. It's like, okay, we need to start somewhere. Just, pick the thing that is most unclear to us. So there are some actions and heuristics that you can take. And then you basically have a completely filled in map of the polarity that you're trying to manage. And anyone who reads this knows what's going on. They know the signals that they need to look out for. They know the actions that you can take when you want to move to the other thing. And they also know the positive and negative effects of both poles. So there's a clear understanding and you have something to talk about. And in this scenario, we actually called the positive domain-oriented programming, because that's what we want to achieve, right? We want to achieve domain-oriented programming, and all the negative effects we baptized shallow technical programming. There might be a better name for it. If you have one, you can always tell us, but that sort of captures all the negative effects that you will experience if you get stuck in a poll for too long.
Yes. I'm back, I think. Good. So now that we have established what a polarity is, how to think about them, and how to visualize them, kind of manage them, we're pretty much done, right? Well, not really, because we have to dive in a little bit deeper, because it's also very important to know what can go wrong by managing a polarity. It's not as easy as it may sound. It's hard to recognize them, even though they are everywhere around us. And we have to know what can go wrong, what we have to look out for, what the traps are there for us. We also need to know what self-fulfilling prophecy has to do with this, and a very important distinction that we need to be very aware of is the one between completeness and accuracy in this context. And that's a very important one, because this will kind of make or break it on how you manage that polarity. But let's start with the first one there, how to spot a polarity in the wild. As I said, they are everywhere. Polarities are everywhere, and it's kind of time that we back up that statement. So once you know how to recognize a polarity, and once you get into that mindset, you will start seeing them everywhere around you. And that can be a curse or a blessing, or both, if you look at it in a polarity way. But once I started to think of these things in a polarity way, I started to see them everywhere. And not just in my working life, also in my personal life. So it can really help you in some cases, and sometimes you're just like, okay, I'm way too much overthinking everything. When I get into an organization, there's always some form of conflict going on at one point. It's not that there's always conflict, but conflict is something that happens a lot. And the thing is that unmanaged polarities are very often leading up to conflict within groups. And if we don't know that there's an unmanaged polarity at the source of this conflict, then it will be very hard to solve it. This is also the reason why we very often mistake a polarity for a conflict. So a conflict can arise, and often arises, when there are underlying dilemmas that result in these opposite views, so the two poles of the polarity. So it's very important that we know and that we can determine what these underlying dilemmas are that are leading up to this conflict. And then we have to figure out, a very important next step, are we dealing with a problem that needs to be solved, or are we dealing with a polarity that needs to be managed? And that is a very important distinction. It's also not that easy, but there are some heuristics, some questions that you can ask yourself if you are in doubt. So if you're finding yourself in conflict and you think, okay, I'm not really sure if this is a problem that needs to be solved, or it's a polarity that needs to be managed, you can ask yourself two questions. And the first one is this difficulty ongoing? And the second question is, are the two poles interdependent? So let me start with the first one. Is the difficulty ongoing? Is there a clear endpoint? Is it solvable? For example, the difficulty, and it's a very hard choice, where are we going for dinner? That is pretty much an either or decision, right? We're going to restaurant A or restaurant B. That's a problem that we can solve. It has a clear endpoint. We have a reservation at 7, and then eventually we will go home from one of these two restaurants. A polarity, on the other hand, has no real clear endpoint, and it's more of an interaction between multiple solutions. It's not solvable with an either or, it's a both and difficulty. So that is the first thing that you need to look out for. And then the other one, are the two poles interdependent? So the solution to a problem can stand alone. We are going to restaurant A or B, and the decision for restaurant A doesn't require restaurant B to be effective. So when it comes to polarities, both solutions depend on each other to work well. You can easily see that this is not the case for the restaurant choice, but if we go back to the title of this talk, when do we go from collaborative modeling to coding? we can argue that that is a polarity that we're dealing with and that we need to go with both and. The difficulty is ongoing, there's no real clear endpoint, and the two poles are interdependent. They depend on each other to work in the best manner. If we go back and forth between the collaborative modeling and the coding, then we will get the best of both worlds, and it will get us the best results in the end. So these are the two questions that you can ask yourself if you are finding yourself in conflict. Try to figure out what these underlying key dilemmas are, what the opposite sides are, and then figure out, is this a problem that needs to be solved, or is it a polarity that we can manage? We have some examples, maybe that will make it easier. Examples always help, usually. So these are some of the polarities that we have seen in the organizations and in our daily personal lives, which we also have. And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Stability versus change, the planning versus action. My personal favorite here is the thinking fast and slow. That might have to do with my background. But we cannot do either or. And thinking fast and slow comes from system 1 and system 2 and how you're thinking. System 1 is your automatic pilot, and system 2 is the system that you use to make very important and heavy decisions. And that's a very short summary. But thank God this is a polarity, and we can move back and forth between thinking fast and thinking slow. If we couldn't do that, it would mean that we would either spend all of our time consciously thinking, overthinking every little decision that we have to make in a day, including, for example, how you need to make coffee. You can do that automatically, luckily. Or we would go on full system 1, and our cognitive bias would determine everything that we're doing. And that would become pretty much chaos as well. So it's very useful and relevant that we can move back and forth between these polarities. So these are some examples, and probably after this you will start seeing them everywhere and start seeing more of them in your own life as well. Well, as I said, a very other important distinction that we need to discuss here is completeness versus accuracy. Because, well, now that we know the polarity thing, well, the managing part cannot be that hard. There is this one thing that's in the way there, and that is the human tendency of wanting to be right. And some people suffer more from that than others, but mostly everyone wants to be right, or wants to be right or seen right by others. So if I ask you, what do you see in this picture? I'm not going to ask you because there are two options. You are seeing a duck or a rabbit. And I can see I'm seeing a duck, and Gien or Kenny can say that they're seeing a rabbit, and we will both be right. But as long as we only say one of the two, neither one of us will be complete. And it's this incompleteness combined with our conviction and need of being right, accurate, which is also fed by cognitive bias, and that is a very important source of the potential problem when we are managing these polarities. So we could go and argue for days about, is this a duck or is this a rabbit? And this is a very simple one because, this is not a very hard problem, or it's not life-changing or anything. But the question is, do we want to be right or do we want to be complete? Very often what we see happening is this: I'm right, you're wrong. I have the only right solution, and this is what we need to do. I'm brilliant, you're an idiot. Very black and white. And I said this is a very easy example. It's easy to admit the other one's accuracy because I can see that there's a duck there as well. But imagine if you're in a conflict in which you really, really believe you're right and the other person is not right, is wrong. So, for example, with this collaborative modeling thing, it would help if we could strive for completeness. So that means we could be able to include all the perspectives, including the minority perspectives. And the hard part is that you have to let go of your own view to see the other view and be complete. So you cannot see the duck without letting go of the rabbit. You cannot manage that polarity properly without being complete. But it happens a lot. In not so simple examples, I'm right and you're wrong. So this is what we see in organizations. The reason that conflict arises is because we are treating a both and polarity like an either or problem that can be solved. And while we are spending a lot of time convincing the other person that he's wrong and that I'm right, we could also spend and invest that time in getting all the perspectives on the table and being complete. So this collaborative modeling versus coding, that is an example of this both and polarity. It's not either or, we can move back and forth. And it's key that we understand this and that we recognize these polarities in our daily lives. So once we've seen the accuracy of someone else's view, it becomes way easier to move back and forth between the views, between the opposite sides, and go through that polarity map. So that means it's very important that we know how to move through that polarity map, how to fill it in, and that we spend less time trying to contradict someone else's accuracy and convince them that we are the only ones who are right. But unfortunately, the crusading part still happens. And well, some things can go wrong there, right?
Wrong.
Wrong. Nice one. Yeah.
So crusading is, as we said, we have crusaders and tradition bearers. People actually want to go to the opposite of the polarity, and there are a lot of people who want to stay in it because people hate change. I already had a lot of discussion whether or not people hate change. It's like, people don't hate change. But my first reaction when there's something's going to change is always, ugh. So I will just generalize that and say people hate change because I hate change. So when you're going to start crusading and pushing people to go to that other pole, they will resist. And because they will be convinced, as we said, they will be convinced that what they're doing right now is the right way. And we try to always sort of link to daily examples in our talks. And one of the best examples that you have of a people being convinced of the right way is how you hang toilet paper in your bathroom. So there's a right way to hang toilet paper in your bathroom, and there is a wrong way to hang toilet paper in your bathroom. And then there's me, who's apparently a monster because I don't care how you hang a toilet paper in your bathroom. And even though we have all this knowledge that there is no right way and wrong way, when we were looking for an example on how people get so convinced and so caught up in the discussion, we actually had a discussion about this. And as you can already see, Evelyn is convinced that there is a right way and a wrong way, and she actually sort of, dug up the patent of the person inventing toilet paper. Like, look, this is how it's pictured. So there's a right way and a wrong way. And, we had this whole discussion. It was like, yeah. And now we're going to teach people to let go of the fact that there is a right and a wrong way to do things. Yeah, because cats. Kenny says that you have to do it the second way because he has cats. Please share your personal preference if you want to. Because having fun discussions is always. But if you want to start managing a polarity, you need to step back from your crusading or your tradition bearing perspective. And you need to emphasize that it's all about finding a balance. I did this all wrong myself when I wanted to we're a remote team for the company I work for now, and I started wanting to go more to team practices and team, a shared way of doing things. And I didn't emphasize the fact that, of course, the individual freedom that we have within the team is also super important. And that I thought, there might be a better balance between them. And people were like, no, we're not going to go more on team decisions. We'll slow down. We'll do this. And, they started talking all about these downsides of having team decisions. And nobody was focusing on the upsides anymore. So basically that went nowhere because I was focusing on the wrong thing. So if you want to get the change inside your company, you have to emphasize that you want to bring balance between the two. It's like, I don't want to do my thing. I understand you. I just want to sort of to have a bit more balance so that we don't experience all these negative sides that we are experiencing right now. And that is also why the infinity symbol on the map is so important to have it there, because you constantly need to find a balance. And if you ever did the trick that this person is doing, you will understand that balance is super difficult. So now it is time for another fun fact intermezzo. The best known concept of balance is yin and yang, which finds its origin in the Chinese philosophy of Taoism. But what does Tao actually mean? Is it A, the path, B, the way, or C, the road?
Every answer is there again.
Drum rolls! Yes, most people got it right. The answer is B, the way. Was that the last fun fact intermezzo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aww.
So sad.
So sad. That was the last fun fact intermezzo, and the only reason I'm trying to sort of talk about it is because I'm not finding my slides. There we are.
There you are.
There I am. So, why does crusading go wrong? It's because you need to understand that the goal of managing a polarity is to stay as much as possible in the upper quadrants of the polarity and not to shift from left to right or vice versa.
Yeah. So let's go here. So a question is, how long would you do this? How long would you manage that polarity? Well, as I said, breathing in, breathing out is really easy, right? I know it from the heart. And if you look at these 4 stages of competence, you would see that every time you will start with unconscious incompetent. And at some point doing polarity mapping, you get to conscious incompetent. So you'll be somewhere around number 2. And then once you visualize it, see the signals and talk about it, you move from 2 to 3, which is conscious competent. At some point, you're competent enough to start measuring, and eventually it slips into your system and you know exactly, oh, now we're going to do this, oh, now we're going to do that, now we're going to do this. So let's really quickly look at the 4 stages of competence if you want to start knowing when should I stop. Well, it's at some point, it's just in your system, right? So you visualize it as a team. You talk about it constantly. You say, hey, that's a signal. We need to move. And at some point, everyone moves eventually. And that's the key. That's the heuristic. OK, probably we've done this. And then, of course, the next polarity will pop up. Maybe it's more programming versus individual programming, right? Similar. So let's move to the last one. And the last one is the self-fulfilling prophecy anti-pattern. So the problem is not the problem. The problem is you add it to the problem. If you are a tradition bearer, and you think, or someone told you, which is a crusader, we need to really do this. So you're a die-hard coder. And someone from the other part, the crusader, say, no, we really need to do collaborative modeling more. Now, what the danger is, if you're not complete, but being accurate yourself, and you start trying to, as a tradition bearer, trying to go towards the crusading part, it will go wrong. So that's what you see here. Let's say you are here in the coding, you know, maybe as a tech lead, you're really convinced that coding is the right way. You're not really sure about this collaborative modeling, but then again, you say, well, let's go with it. That's always not a good way to go. If you drive that change, you drive it from a deep thing that you're not convinced collaborative modeling works. So that's set up to fail, because on one hand, the people on your side, the tradition bearer, will say, what are you doing? You're also a coder. And then the other part will see points like, yeah, we don't believe in you are able to change this, right? So you tried, but the tradition bearing force in you make it pull back quickly to the negative, because you're biased towards the negative of this side, right? If you're on the left part coding, you're really biased towards this. So every signal you see, you say, aha, you see it fails. So you haven't spent enough time here. What we do we want to stay on the upper quadrant. But no, you're always feeling the downside. And that's it. And last but not least, about judging, leave that to the cats. And thank you all. Here is our detailed info if you want to know more. And well, I think we have 5 more minutes for questions.